Starving lion encounters lost African boy. What happens next will shock you. The savannah stretched vast and unyielding, painted in shades of gold and bronze beneath the relentless afternoon sun. Waves of shimmering heat rose from the cracked earth, distorting the distant horizon where jagged acacia trees clawed at the sky. The land, once teeming with life, now seemed to hold its breath in the oppressive heat of the dry season. A faint rustling in the tall grass disturbed the eerie silence, followed by the low rumble of a predator's growl, a sound both ancient and primal. From the shadows emerged a lion, its emaciated frame a ghost of its former majesty. Its ribs pressed against its tawny skin, and its once lustrous mane hung limp around its neck. Hunger burned in its amber eyes, sharp and piercing, as it scanned the parched landscape for even the faintest promise of prey. The lion's gaze fixed on a movement in the distance. A lone figure trudged through the savannah, dwarfed by the endless expanse. It wasn't an antelope or a warthog, nor any creature familiar to the lion's hunting instincts. It was a boy, a child no older than 7, his small frame fragile against the vast wilderness. The boy's steps were uneven, his bare feet kicking up clouds of dust as he stumbled forward. His clothes, once vibrant, were now faded and torn, clinging to his body like a second skin. His lips were cracked, his skin sunburnt, and his eyes, wide and filled with fear, darted desperately across the landscape. He clutched a small, tattered satchel to his chest, as if it held the last remnants of his world. Johnny, that was his name. He didn't know how long he had been walking. Hours? Days? Time had blurred into an endless march of survival since the bus had broken down, leaving him and a few others stranded in the wilderness. The others had left in search of help, promising to return, but they hadn't. Johnny had waited, and when waiting became unbearable, he had ventured out alone. Now he was lost. Behind him, the lion crouched low, its powerful muscles tensing beneath its lean frame. It crept closer, each step a whisper against the brittle grass. The boy was oblivious to the predator's approach, his focus consumed by the merciless sun and the unrelenting thirst gnawing at his throat. A gust of hot wind swept across the plain, carrying the lion's scent forward. Johnny stopped abruptly, his instincts sharper than his young mind could process. He turned his head slowly, and his eyes met the lion's, golden, predatory, and fixed on him with an intensity that froze the blood in his veins. For a moment, neither moved. The savannah seemed to hold its breath. Then, the lion stepped forward, its massive paws silent against the dry ground. Its movements were deliberate, almost methodical, as if savoring the moment before the strike. Johnny's chest heaved, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. His feet refused to move, rooted in place by a terror he couldn't name. Tears blurred his vision, but he didn't cry out. There was no one to hear him. The lion was close now, too close. Johnny could see the flecks of dried blood on its muzzle, the deep lines etched into its weathered face. The beast paused, tilting its head as if studying him. And then, in an act of defiance against every instinct screaming at him to flee, Johnny whispered a single word. "Please." The lion froze, its ears twitched, its gaze softening for a fleeting moment. Something unspoken passed between them, a fragile connection that defied the laws of nature. The predator hesitated, but the savannah was a harsh and unpredictable place, and nothing stayed still for long. Above them, a vulture circled lazily, its shadow skimming the ground like a reminder of mortality. The lion's muscles coiled again, its instincts warring with whatever had stayed its hunger. The moment hung in fragile balance. And then, just as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land, the lion took another step forward. This time, not as a hunter, but as something else entirely. Something that would change both their lives forever. Johnny had always been a quiet child, more inclined to listen than to speak. Born in a small village nestled near the edge of the Great Rift Valley, his life had been a simple one. The early mornings were filled with the songs of birds and the gentle rustle of wind through the fields. His grandmother, Nyasha, raised him after his parents succumbed to an illness when he was barely 3 years old. Nyasha was his world, a wellspring of love and wisdom. Her stories of their ancestors, who lived in harmony with the land and its creatures, were Johnny bedtime lullabies. "Respect the earth and its beings," she often told him, her voice like the soothing hum of bees. "We are all connected, child. Even the lion has a purpose." But life in the village was not without hardship. The land was unforgiving during the dry seasons, and hunger often lurked in the shadows of their thatched roof hut. Still, they endured, leaning on the strength of their small community. Everything changed one fateful morning. Nyasha fell ill, her frail body unable to fight off a sudden fever. Within days, Johnny was alone. The village elders, struggling with their own burdens, decided to send Johnny to live with distant relatives in the city. It was a heart-wrenching farewell, but the elders believed the city would offer him a better chance at survival. The journey was supposed to be simple, a ride on an old bus that rattled like a tin can through the rugged terrain. But when the bus broke down miles from civilization, the passengers were left stranded. They huddled together under the sparse shade of an acacia tree, waiting for help that never came. As hours turned to days, panic began to spread. Most of the adults decided to set out on foot in search of rescue, leaving behind the weakest passengers, including Johnny. His cries for Nyasha went unanswered, and when fear outweighed hope, he too began to walk, clutching the satchel that held his grandmother's hand-woven shawl. The lion had once ruled the savannah as a king in his prime. He was known as Kaido among his pride, a name that echoed strength and dominance. His golden mane had been a symbol of power, his roar a declaration of supremacy. But time had not been kind to Kaido. A violent challenge from a younger, stronger male had left him injured and exiled. Banished from his pride, he wandered alone, nursing his wounds and grappling with the loss of his family. Without the support of his pride, hunting became a brutal game of survival. Prey was scarce, and the dry season showed no mercy. Kaido's once mighty frame had withered, his hunger gnawing at his resolve. Yet, something deeper than hunger drove him forward, a primal will to live, an instinct to endure. Each night, as the stars blanketed the vast sky, he remembered the cubs he had once protected and the lionesses he had hunted alongside. They were gone now, but their memories lingered like ghosts in the cool night breeze. In his solitude, Kaido had learned to tread carefully. He avoided the territories of other prides and the traps of human hunters who sought his kind for sport. His encounters with humans had always been marked by fear and violence, but he had never sought them out until now. Johnny and Kaido, though worlds apart, shared a silent kinship. Both had been torn from the life they knew, thrust into a merciless wilderness that tested every fiber of their being. Johnny's loneliness gnawed at him as much as his hunger, the absence of human warmth a void he couldn't fill. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind, a fragile thread connecting him to a sense of purpose. We are all connected. Kaido's existence was equally hollow. Without a pride, he was an aimless shadow of the predator he once was. His survival was no longer about dominance, but about finding a reason to keep moving through the unrelenting hardships of the wild. When their paths crossed, it wasn't just a chance meeting between predator and prey. It was a collision of two lost souls, each searching for something they couldn't name. Johnny longed for safety and belonging. Kaido sought meaning in a life that had become a relentless fight against extinction. As the boy's trembling whisper of please broke the silence of the savannah, something deep within the lion stirred. A flicker of memory, perhaps, or a faint echo of the life he had lost. And in Johnny's eyes, Kaido saw not fear but a reflection of his own struggle. Their encounter wasn't the beginning of a hunt. It was the beginning of a connection that neither could have anticipated. A bond that would redefine the boundaries of survival, trust, and compassion. The savannah seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, a sea of golden grass swaying gently in the late afternoon breeze. The sun, dipping closer to the horizon, painted the land in hues of amber and crimson. Johnny stood motionless, his tiny frame dwarfed by the towering wilderness. His wide, tear-streaked eyes locked with the lion's piercing gaze. Kaido stepped forward, his massive paws silent on the brittle grass. The faint sound of his shallow, labored breaths filled the still air. Hunger weighed heavily in his movements, but there was something else in his demeanor, a hesitation, an unspoken question. Johnny's heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the sounds of the savannah. Instinct screamed at him to run, to flee from the creature that embodied every child's nightmare. But his legs refused to obey. His grandmother's words surfaced in his mind like a whisper carried on the wind. Even the lion has a purpose. The boy clutched the shawl in his satchel tighter, drawing some small measure of comfort from its familiar texture. Summoning every ounce of courage, he held his ground. "Please," he whispered again, the word fragile yet resolute. Kaido halted mid-step, his ears twitching as if the boy's voice reached a part of him buried beneath the layers of hunger and instinct. The lion's golden eyes softened, and for the first time, Johnny noticed their depth, a well of pain and weariness mirroring his own. But nature, indifferent and cruel, did not allow for prolonged moments of understanding. From the distance, a hyena's haunting laugh pierced the air, sharp and mocking. The sound stirred something primal in Kaido. His head snapped to the side, his body tensing like a coiled spring. Johnny flinched, his fragile calm shattered by the eerie calls of the scavengers. He scanned the horizon and spotted movement in the grass, shadows creeping closer. Hyenas, drawn by the scent of weakness, had begun to encircle the pair, their cunning eyes gleaming with predatory intent. Kaido growled low and deep, a rumble that vibrated through the earth and sent a chill up Johnny's spine. The lion turned his gaze back to the boy, then back to the encroaching threat, as if weighing his options. In the wild, even a single hyena was dangerous to a lion weakened by hunger. Pack, however, was deadly. Kaido knew this all too well. His survival instincts roared to life, urging him to retreat and save himself. But as he looked at the boy, so small, so vulnerable, a different instinct emerged, one he hadn't felt since he had been cast out of his pride. The need to protect. The hyenas grew bolder, their laughter echoing as they closed in. One lunged forward, snapping its jaws as if testing Kaido's resolve. With a ferocious roar, the lion leapt into action, his powerful frame a shield between Johnny and the encircling predators. The boy stumbled back, falling to the ground as the scene unfolded before him. He watched, awestruck, as the lion fought with a ferocity that defied its weakened state. Kaido's massive paws swiped through the air, striking one hyena and sending it yelping into the grass. Another darted in from the side, aiming for his exposed flank, but Kaido twisted with surprising agility, his sharp teeth snapping mere inches from the attacker. Johnny's fear began to shift into something else, an overwhelming mixture of gratitude and wonder. This lion, a creature he had every reason to fear, was risking its life to protect him. But the battle was far from over. The pack, undeterred, continued to press their attack, their relentless strategy testing the limits of Kaido's endurance. Blood matted his golden fur as the hyena's teeth found their mark, but the lion refused to yield. Johnny's small hands trembled as he reached into his satchel. His fingers brushed against the rough texture of the shawl, but they paused when they felt something harder, more substantial. His grandmother's walking stick, a simple wooden rod she had given him before her passing, lay tucked beneath the fabric. Gripping the stick tightly, Johnny scrambled to his feet. He knew it was a meager weapon against the savannah's cruel inhabitants, but he couldn't just stand by and watch. With a shout that surprised even himself, Johnny charged forward, swinging the stick wildly at the nearest hyena. The predator snarled, startled by the boy's sudden aggression, and backed away. Kaido glanced at the boy, a flicker of astonishment crossing his weary eyes, before resuming his battle. Together, lion and boy became an unlikely team, their combined efforts driving the hyenas back. Slowly, one by one, the scavengers retreated into the tall grass, their mocking laughter replaced by frustrated growls. As the last of the hyenas disappeared into the shadows, the savannah fell silent once more. Kaido stood panting, his sides heaving with exhaustion. Deep gashes marred his body, but his gaze remained steady as he turned to face the boy. Johnny, his chest rising and falling with adrenaline-fueled breaths, looked back at the lion with wide, unblinking eyes. The distance between them seemed to collapse in that moment. Johnny stepped closer, his small hand reaching out tentatively. Kaido, still wary, lowered his massive head. For a brief second, predator and prey became something more, kindred spirits bound by their shared struggle. Johnny placed his hand gently on Kaido's mane, the soft fur coarse beneath his fingers. The lion didn't pull away. Instead, he let out a low, rumbling sigh, a sound that wasn't a growl but something closer to acceptance. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the savannah in hues of deep purple and gold. In the fading light, the boy and the lion stood side by side, their unlikely bond forged in the crucible of survival. Neither knew what the coming night would bring, but for now, they had each other. And in the unforgiving wilderness, that was enough. The savannah transformed as night descended, a tapestry of shadows and stars blanketing the land. The distant calls of nocturnal creatures echoed across the plains, creating an eerie symphony of life and survival. Johnny and Kaido, unlikely allies, stood together under the vast sky. Johnny's small hands worked carefully to tear a strip from his grandmother's shawl. He had seen Nyasha tend to wounds often, and though his movements were clumsy, his intent was clear. "You protected me," he murmured, his voice soft yet resolute. "Now let me help you." Kaido lay still, his golden eyes watching the boy's every move. The lion's instincts told him to resist, to reject the touch of a creature so different from himself. But the boy's steady determination disarmed him. As Johnny wrapped the makeshift bandage around a gash on Kaido's flank, the lion let out a low, rumbling sound, not of pain, but of tolerance. Their bond deepened that night. Johnny, still too afraid to sleep alone, curled up close to the lion, his back pressed against Kaido's side for warmth. The lion, despite his wounds, stayed awake, his sharp senses attuned to every sound in the dark. When dawn broke, painting the sky with strokes of gold and rose, the savannah began to stir. Johnny woke to find Kaido standing watch, his mane glowing in the soft morning light. For a moment, the boy marveled at the lion's strength and resilience. But survival in the wild was relentless, and hunger soon reminded both of their vulnerabilities. Johnny's stomach growled loudly, a sound that made Kaido's ears twitch. The lion, too, was famished, his frame thinner than it had been days before. They ventured out together, Johnny following close behind Kaido as the lion navigated the terrain. The boy carried his grandmother's walking stick, its familiar weight a comfort. He didn't know where they were going, but he trusted Kaido, who moved with purpose despite his injuries. As the day wore on, their trust in one another began to show in subtle ways. When they came across a dried-up watering hole, Kaido growled softly, signaling for Johnny to stay back. The lion scouted the area, his nose lifting to sniff the wind, before returning to the boy with an approving rumble. It was safe. They shared moments of unspoken understanding like this, moments that blurred the lines between human and beast. As dusk approached, they encountered their greatest challenge yet. The pair stumbled upon a herd of impalas grazing in a sunlit clearing. Johnny watched silently as Kaido's body tensed, his predatory instincts taking over. The lion's amber eyes narrowed, his powerful muscles coiling like springs. Johnny's heart raced. He understood what this meant. For Kaido to survive, he needed to hunt. The boy's mind raced with conflicting emotions, fear for the prey, awe for the lion's strength, and a deep, growing respect for the laws of the wild. Kaido moved with practiced stealth, his massive frame gliding through the grass as silently as a shadow. Johnny stayed behind, clutching the walking stick tightly as he watched the scene unfold. The hunt was brutal and quick. Kaido's powerful leap brought down a young impala, its life ending in the blink of an eye. Johnny flinched, tears welling in his eyes, but he didn't look away. He understood now what Nyasha had meant when she said, "Even the lion has a purpose." Kaido ate first, his sharp teeth tearing into the meat with an efficiency born of necessity. But then something astonishing happened. The lion stepped back, his gaze meeting Johnny. It was an invitation, unspoken but clear. The boy hesitated. The idea of eating raw meat turned his stomach, but the pangs of hunger gnawed at him relentlessly. Slowly, he stepped forward, his trembling hands reaching for a piece of the kill. Kaido watched him closely but made no move to stop him. The moment was transformative. Johnny, once a helpless child lost in the wilderness, was now a part of it. Kaido, once a predator driven by instinct, had shown an extraordinary act of sharing. Their newfound bond was put to the ultimate test that night. As they rested near a cluster of rocks, the sound of snapping branches shattered the stillness. Johnny bolted upright, clutching the walking stick as fear coursed through him. Kaido was already on his feet, his ears pinned back and his teeth bared. Emerging from the shadows were two rogue lions, younger and stronger, their eyes locked on Kaido with deadly intent. Johnny understood instinctively this wasn't just a territorial dispute. These lions saw Kaido's weakened state and aimed to eliminate him as competition. Kaido roared, a sound that sent shivers down Johnny's spine. The rogue lions circled, their movements calculated and menacing. Kaido positioned himself between Johnny and the intruders, his body a barrier of raw courage. The first lion lunged, and Kaido met him head-on. Their clash was a whirlwind of claws and teeth, a savage dance of survival. The second lion tried to flank him, but Johnny, fueled by desperation, leapt into action. "Leave him alone!" the boy shouted, swinging the walking stick with all his strength. The strike caught the second lion by surprise, causing it to stumble. Kaido took the opportunity to swipe at the first lion, forcing it to retreat momentarily. The battle was fierce, the odds heavily stacked against them. Kaido's movements grew slower, his wounds reopening as blood stained his golden fur. But he fought on, his determination unwavering. Just as Johnny thought all was lost, a thunderous roar echoed across the savannah. The rogue lions froze, their ears flicking toward the sound. A small pride emerged from the darkness, Kaido's old pride, drawn by the commotion. The rogues, now outnumbered, fled into the night. Kaido stood trembling, his body battered but unbroken. From the pride, a lioness approached cautiously, her eyes scanning Kaido's injuries before shifting to Johnny. The boy held his breath as the lioness sniffed the air around him, her gaze softening. One by one, the other lions moved closer, surrounding Kaido and Johnny. There was no hostility in their movements, only a quiet acceptance. Kaido, it seemed, had been forgiven, his place among the pride restored. Johnny felt a swell of emotion as Kaido turned to look at him, their bond stronger than ever. In this moment, the boy realized they had both found something they thought they had lost: family, protection, and a sense of belonging. As the pride settled around them, Johnny lay down beside Kaido, his small hand resting on the lion's mane. Together, under the vast expanse of stars, they shared a moment of peace, knowing they had survived against all odds. The first light of dawn cast a warm glow over the savannah, painting the land in shades of gold and lavender. Johnny awoke to the gentle rustling of grass as the pride stirred around him. Kaido lay beside him, his breathing deep and steady, though his body bore the scars of their shared ordeal. For the first time in days, Johnny felt a glimmer of hope. He was no longer alone, no longer adrift in the unforgiving wilderness. Kaido, the lion who had once been a symbol of fear, was now his protector and, in a way, his family. The pride, with Kaido reintegrated into their ranks, began to move as the sun climbed higher. Johnny followed cautiously, unsure of his place among the powerful creatures. Yet, the lioness who had first approached him, the matriarch, glanced back often, her gaze steady but not unkind. She seemed to accept Johnny as part of their temporary group, perhaps sensing the unique bond he shared with Kaido. Guided by the pride, Johnny found himself nearing a familiar sight, the faint outline of a village on the horizon. His heart leapt as he recognized the simple thatched roofs and the distant sound of human voices. It was his home, or what was left of it. Kaido slowed his pace as they approached the edge of the village, his movements growing more hesitant. He stopped just shy of the boundary, his golden eyes fixed on Johnny. It was clear he would go no further. Johnny turned to the lion, tears welling in his eyes. He stepped forward, placing a small hand on Kaido's mane, feeling the rough texture beneath his fingertips. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. Kaido rumbled softly, a sound that Johnny had come to understand as his way of responding. The boy stepped back, his eyes lingering on the lion who had saved him, protected him, and shown him a side of the wild he would never forget. With one final glance, Johnny turned and walked toward the village, his legs trembling but his spirit stronger than ever. News of Johnny's miraculous survival spread quickly. Villagers gathered around him, listening in awe as he recounted his journey. His encounter with the lion, the hyenas, and the rogue lions, and how Kaido had become his guardian in the wild. At first, many were skeptical. A lion protecting a child? It seemed too fantastical to believe. But Johnny's sincerity, combined with the wounds and weariness etched into his young face, left little room for doubt. Elders in the village took his story as a sign, a reminder of the delicate balance between humans and the natural world. They spoke of how the lion, a creature often feared and hunted, had shown an extraordinary act of mercy and compassion. In the weeks that followed, the village began to change. Johnny's story inspired a newfound respect for the wildlife that shared their land. Hunters who once sought lions as trophies began to see them as beings with their own struggles and instincts, deserving of coexistence rather than conflict. The elders worked with a nearby wildlife conservation group to establish a protected area, ensuring that lions like Kaido and his pride could roam freely without fear of poaching. The area became a sanctuary, not just for animals, but for people seeking to understand the profound connection between humanity and nature. Johnny's new journey, Johnny, now a symbol of resilience and unity, grew into a young man determined to honor the lion who had saved his life. With the help of villagers and conservationists, he created an education center near the sanctuary. There, he taught children about the importance of wildlife preservation, sharing his story with each new generation. Kaido became a legend, his image painted on murals and carved into wooden totems around the village. Though Johnny never saw the lion again, he often thought of him, imagining him thriving with his pride under the vast African sky. Years later, Johnny stood at the edge of the sanctuary, watching the sun set over the savannah. The sight always filled him with a bittersweet sense of longing and gratitude. He thought about Kaido and the lessons the lion had taught him, about courage, survival, and the unspoken bond that could exist between species. He turned to the group of children behind him, their eyes wide with wonder as they listened to his story. "In the wild," he told them, "we often see only the surface, predator and prey, survival and fear. But beneath that, there's something greater. Even the fiercest creatures have hearts, and sometimes they show us what it means to truly live." The children sat in silence, the weight of his words settling over them like the twilight. As the stars began to emerge, Johnny gazed out at the sanctuary, his heart full. He knew Kaido was out there somewhere, a king of the savannah, still watching over his domain. Their time together had been brief, but its impact would last forever, a testament to the unbreakable bond between human and animal, and the power of compassion to bridge even the greatest divides.